So I'm going to read this out and then, I'll talk about it a little bit and then I'll give you guys an example. So abstraction means to identify the main most significant characteristics of something with respect to the program, while simultaneously discarding anything minor and insignificant. So basically what this says is focusing on, the most important aspects, and anything that is, not important, you basically just drop it. You don't really care about it. So let's say we're creating a filing system for company employees. To create employee objects, we wrote an employee class. What characteristics are important to describe them in company? So there are certain characteristics that are important to describing them in the company filing system. So let's say you have the name, you have a date of birth, you have a social security number, and employee ID. So if you go and create this class, we'll kind of look like this, right? So in the employee class, we declare the following variables. So the string name, int age, long social security number, and long employee ID. And we abstract away any unnecessary information like eye color. So what this pretty much means is, so let's actually go in here. Let's it's being weird, not registering my clicks. Let me just create a class here. So we'll go, we'll kind of create a class that's called employee. Right. And within this class, we kind of saw there's four main attributes to the class. So we saw there was a long, SSN. There was string name. There was string date of birth, and there was a long employee ID. I think it was something like this. I'm trying to copy it. So yeah, so int age. Okay, so we'll do int age. And this, oops. Right. So, let's say we go forward. Let's say, when we try to scab an employee, and outside of this, maybe there's something like string, maybe eye color, eye color. There's string, maybe hair color. There's string, I don't know, shoe size, right? Realistically, what we mean by abstraction is that we look at what is really necessary to have, right? To have for an employee. So it's important to know the name of the employee because you need to know the name of your employees. Maybe age, I would probably change this to date of birth. So it would be like a class you can use. So it would be like date of birth. I'll use that instead of age. Because ideally, you probably need to know the date of birth of your employees because maybe you have some, maybe you have a system in place for wishing birthdays or stuff like that. Maybe you have certain milestones, stuff like that. You have the long employee ID. Well, every employee has an ID essentially. That's how you find them. Otherwise, you can have multiple people with the same name, right? You have an SSN, so kind of every citizen in every country or almost every country has some sort of social security number associated with them. So this is how I would kind of make this class. Maybe I would add something else like date, start date, something like that. Maybe so you can track how many years they've worked in a company. Outside of that, something like the eye color, the hair color, the shoe size, it's not important in describing our employee, right? Because otherwise you just be keeping all this information where you don't really care about it, right? It doesn't really matter to you. The only thing you care about is the name, maybe the age or date of birth, the employee, the start date, the social security number, right? So by abstraction, we basically take out the unnecessary details, right? So stuff like this, eye color, hair color, shoe size. So I guess, yeah, so this is what I mean by abstraction. Obviously, in the future, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail. So let's go in and kind of create this class. Create an instance or an object of this class. That's what I mean. Sorry. So we kind of have this employee, right? So we know that the way we kind of initialize an object is that we have to give it sorry, we have to give it a type first. So employee, and then let's do employee one, for example, and then we have to do new employee, right? That's how we generate a new object or a new instance of this class, and this will be a new employee. So you can go in and print employee one, right? But as we know, like anything that's not a primitive type is going to be a reference variable. So if I go and print this out, it's actually going to give me the reference to this object or to this instance, right? Right, so there's this, okay. Maybe it's not that useful to us. Maybe we can do something like employee ID. Maybe we want to print out all of the attributes that this employee has, right? Name, date of birth, oops. And then we have start date. Right. So let's say we want to print all of this information. So now we'll print this out, give it a second. Right, so we basically have no information on, everything is set to like a default value. So there's no information on this whatsoever. Right, so this is not ideal, right? We want to, when we create like an employee, we want to give it some, some information, right? So when you initialize an employee, when you initialize an instance of this, of this class, we want to give it some sort of values, right? So last time we talked a little bit about the constructor. So what the constructor allows us to do, so if I right click and then I do generate, so I can do alt insert. I don't have an insert on my keyboard, which is very weird, so I can't do that. But so generate, alt insert, and then a constructor. And then when you do this, you can basically pick all of like the attributes that you want in your constructor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of them. And then I'm going to create this. Right? So we see here that it kind of creates a constructor with these parameters. And then all of these parameters are set to this.name is equal to name. Okay, no problem. So first, let's look at this constructor, right? Or just this, just the parameters. So what this allows us to do is basically every time you create a new instance of your class, of this employee class, you're able to give this employee some sort of attributes. You're able to set these attributes. And to do this, you have to do it here. So whenever you're setting your whenever you're creating an instance of your employee, you have to kind of give it the same, you have to follow this constructor in the same way so that your attributes for this class will be set accordingly, right? So it kind of makes sense. You're mapping it as you're putting it into a function. It's just a regular function. Right, so when we go this, we can it will kind of show you what you need. So you need a string name, a date of birth, a long employee ID, and start date, and an SSN. So we can go Edward, so that'll be my name. So date of birth, so I can go new date. Date dot now. I think I have to do date time. No, okay. System dot now. So what I'm trying to do right now is figure out how to use the current time. So I can do the current time in milliseconds, or I can use the actual date format. So let's go with this. So Java date now. Oh. Okay, so it's local datetime.now. So I don't usually remember, I didn't usually deal with time, but it's this local datetime now. So we can do this, or we can do, this is the data we're going to use. We can use a simple date formatter. Okay, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to change the date of birth to be a long. And what this allows me to do is use the current time in milliseconds. So system.current time milliseconds is basically a function that we can use to get the current time since a certain year. So I'm thinking, I think it's like 1930 or something like that. I don't remember. And that will be from that time, from a certain year, don't quote me on that, to the timer now in like seconds or in milliseconds. And with this, instead of, and then because we changed this long date of birth, we have to change, this long date of birth. It may be a newborn baby, but that's okay. So I don't want this, and I don't want this, so this will be this. So now we're missing the long employee ID, so I'm just gonna give it like, 1, 2, 3, 4 long, or 5 long. And then I'm missing the start date. So, maybe I'll do this minus like 2000. I don't think it'd be much more different. So I'm going to change the state as well to be a long. So I'm going to do the start date from now, just to make my life a little bit easier. So I have to change both of these variables. So the variable for the class, and the attribute or the variable type for the constructor. So it's going to be, maybe we start now. And we're missing one more thing, and it's the long SSN. So I'm just going to give it some random number. And now when we have this, we're kind of able to print. So when I print all of these attributes, I will actually get a certain value associated with them, as you can see. So this is just, kind of dealing with the constructor, setting your initial variables or initial attributes for your object. So let's look at this constructor for a second, and I'll pull up the slides here. So, kind of using this, right? Using this, it's kind of called variable shadowing. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to name variables kind of in a similar way. So we see that name, a name for the constructor here, and the name for the actual attribute here. They're using the same kind of literal keys, right? Or literal, like a keyword. This parameter allows us to access the variables in here. So basically, this, kind of keyword here allows us to access the attributes that we set for the employee. And when you do like this dot name or this dot date of birth, it will actually like map to the name. So let me annotate. So using this dot name will map to, string dot name, string name, and then this name, maybe use a different color here. This name will map to this name, right? So using this variable shadowing allows us to, not get confused and not name things in a weird way. So what could I have done to kind of combat this? If I really want to use, if I really want to just do this, I will have to basically give this another name or give this another name. All right, so if I do name and name, we know that this is going to point to this, or we know that this name is going to point to this name because there's no other variable named name. But it doesn't really make sense to use, I don't know, name a variable num when you could use variable shadowing where it allows you to name variables in a similar way, but instead of accessing them in some form like this, you're able to use this keyword to, access it directly, or, access it directly to the actual attribute. And this is where the this keyword comes in place. It allows you to directly access the attribute in your class. Okay, so this is kind of, talking about variable shadowing, abstraction, how we use the constructor. So I guess, if you guys can answer this question, do you think it makes sense to be able to access this, SSN or this employee ID from anywhere outside of this class? Like I can go in here and basically do employee1 dot employee ID is equal to, a new number, or maybe change the SSN, right? I don't know, right? I can change it to whatever I want, right? Do you guys think it makes sense to do this outside of the class? Okay, so it doesn't really make sense to do this, right? Exactly. So it doesn't make sense to do this because, anyone can just come in and start like editing it. So the way to combat this is, again, we talked about, sorry, let me close this. We talked about, where'd it go? Here, the access modifiers. So in this case, when we're trying to not be able to access, variables from anywhere outside of this class, we have to use the private keyword. And the private keyword will allow us to kind of protect this information that we initially set and not have anything outside of this class be able to change it. So now I can't go in and print. So, well, now I have another different problem. How do I, if I want to print it, let's say I don't need to edit it, okay, but I need to be able to print it. So now I have this issue where I can't really, print it, or I can't access it because I need to know what it is. Maybe I need to like verify something with the employee ID or the SSN, but I don't want to edit it. I need to be able to verify it or do something with it. So, this is, a common issue that you'll come across, and the way to kind of fix this is to create a function that will basically return you, the employee ID or the SSN. And this is what we call getters and setters. So if I right click and I do generate, instead of the constructors, there's getters, there's setters, there's getters and setters, right? So if I do a getter and I just want to do this and this, it will create me a function that will return me the employee ID and the SSN, right? It's kind of the same way of going like public, public allows anybody to access it, right? Long, basically the return type, and then the employee ID, or is like the name. Get employee ID will be the name of the function. So now with this function, we're able to, instead of directly printing it like this, instead we have to call a function that will return us the value. So either the employee ID or the SSN, and then we'll be able to do whatever we want. So in this case, we want to print it. So we can just do, dot, employee1 dot, and then we see all of the attributes of the class. So let me go here. Oh, it didn't like that. I can't do it, unfortunately. I was going to annotate, but we can see that, name, start date, date of birth are kind of the attributes. And then we have like a method. So M stands for method, and I don't know what F stands for. Like I can't really think of one, but I call these really attributes, and this is like methods. M stands for method. So here we can see like all the methods and the attributes of the class, and we can see that get employee ID was added into this method. So let's say I comment this out for now. Oops. And I do dot again, right? We can see that they're no longer there, right? I commented it out, so we know the comments kind of, hide code, so it's not there. And if I comment it back in, it's back in there. So get employee ID and get SSN, they're back in there. So we know that, calling get employee ID with, open close brackets will be a function call and it's going to return us a long. So that's useful to us because we want to be able to print. And we want to do the same thing for the SSN. So we use the SSN, which, will give us the SSN back. So if I now go and print it, we get this. Okay, so you think it makes sense to be able to access the rest of these kind of like attributes and change them however we want from wherever we want? Well, maybe not from wherever we want, but again, kind of same issue, right? So essentially, we don't really want these to be, be visible outside or to be, to be able to basically call it like this. We want to use functions to get our information. And we also want to use function to change our information. So in this case, maybe we want to change like the name. Well, I don't think you'll ever change the date of birth, and I don't think you'll ever change the start date. Or maybe let's say somebody quit and then they come back into the company, they'll have a different start date. Maybe their employee ID will stay the same. I don't know. Right? So let's say with name. It makes sense. Maybe somebody got married, maybe somebody got divorced, maybe they changed their actual name, right? So it makes sense to be able to change that name. But we don't want to be able to change it to like anything we want. We want it to be, a certain format. We want to get some like clarification on what is actually required within a name. Like let's say it can't be empty, it can't be too long, it can't be this, it can't be that, right? So this is what we use setters for. So again, I'm gonna go in and create our getters. So right click or alt insert and choose your setters, and I'm gonna create this for the rest of these. And I'm gonna go in here and get name, get date of birth, and get start date. With this, we're kind of able to again print it all. Right, so we're able to do this. So now let's say we want to be able to set the name. So right now I can't really go in and do employee one dot name is equal to, this. Since we made this attribute private, right, we're not able to directly, change this name. So let's say we go in and we create our setter. So again, I'm going to right click, but you can do alt insert. And then there's getters, setters, and getters and setters. Again, I'm going to use the setter. So what the setter allows us to do is to be able to set the actual value that we want, right? So we're able to set the name. So instead of doing this, what we can do is employee one dot set name, and then I can give it a certain value, and then I can print it out. Employee one dot get name. Right. So it prints it out. This is the new line. So, but ideally, your employee is always going to have a name. Like you're not gonna have an employee with no name. It doesn't really make any sense because everybody has a name, right? So just like any function, you're able to set constraints on what you can do, right? So if you saw like the previous code, you have if statements, you have for loops, you have this, you have that. You have like all the power to control what the program actually does. So in here, what we actually want to do is we want to make sure that the string that we put in here is a valid string. And what do we consider a valid string? In this case, we're going to consider a valid string, name is valid only if it is not empty. So basically anything that's like not valid is equal to not valid. So basically anything that's empty is not valid. Or maybe anything that's null, no, it's not valid, and stuff like that. So how do we do this? With this, basically with a simple if. So if, our name is empty. So again, name is a string, so it's an object. So essentially, it could have a certain value you're looking for. So you can do name, we can do equals, empty string, or we can do another method that is empty, and it returns us a boolean. So essentially, doing something like this, equals, so essentially, if your name is equal to empty string, or if your name is empty, they're gonna give you the same result. But ideally, when you do is empty, it kind of makes more sense to do that rather than equals nothing. Because it's easier to read, it's easier to understand. When you look at this and this, you kind of see that this person thought about their code a little bit more. It makes it seem like they care. So, there's kind of like a difference in between like a whatever programmer, and something that's a good programmer, someone who cares about the quality of the code. So essentially, functions like these is something that you want to use whenever you compare something that's empty. So with this, we're basically, so if is empty, maybe you want to return, right? Or throw an error, something like that. But for now, I'm just gonna return. Maybe what I actually want to do is maybe I want to return a boolean. Maybe it's true or false. So if it was changed or if it wasn't changed. So I can change this, and I can do boolean, right? And I can do false, and then I can do true, right? So if our name, is empty, so if it's like this, then I'm going to return false. So false basically means, not changed, and true means name was changed, right? So name was not changed, and then if it's true, name was changed. And then we can go in here, and we can do something like if, employee one set name. Let's say we want to s out, name changed, else, name not changed. And if I go and I run it, we're kind of able to see, it's the same thing up until here. And then we can see that when we try to set our name with an empty string, it's actually going to return us a false because it's empty. So it returns us a false. And because it's a false, it goes into this else and prints out name not changed. And then later we see that the name wasn't actually changed. So if I go here and change it to something like this, we can see that the name was changed. It was initially Edward, the name changed, and now it's Kevin, right? So we can see that, with the power of these setters, we're able to really build the constraints that we need to whenever we're creating our classes.